Well, a couple of opening remarks. First of all, apologies that I have a frog in my throat. I blame British Airways and 24 hours in an aeroplane. Also, I'm very disappointed that your winter is warmer than our summer. It's really annoying. And the other apology at the outset is if I appear somewhat distracted, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, first of all. Let me just make that completely plain. But if I'm distracted, I'm trying to follow what's happening in my country as it's about to apparently potentially make the worst decision it's ever made. The last time I looked at the figures, if any of you are interested, I'm talking about the Brexit. Out of about 5 million votes counted so far, out of 46 million or something eligible votes, the staying in, the remaining within Europe, was ahead by only 50,000 votes. So it's like less than 1%. Could go either way. If it goes the other way at the end of the day, if I may, I'll take the opportunity of asking this very intelligent and smart group of people if there's any immigration lawyers amongst you who can help me with political asylum. But you know, I'm around for a cocktail or 10 later on, should that be the case. But anyway, fingers crossed. I also want to say that I didn't invent Athena Swan. If I had invented Athena Swan, I would have a head that's even bigger than it is now. I didn't. So I don't want to take credit for that. It was actually invented with my organisation, Equality Challenge Unit, before I joined, along with some very esteemed and significant leading women scientific academics back in 2005. And I may say some more about that. As an aside, Athena Swan, why the name? Many of you know this. Athena is the goddess of wisdom. I'm not a classicist, but that's what I believe. SWAN stands for Scientific Women's Academic Network. So, what I'd like to do today, because there are many of you who know a lot about this and obviously about the broader gender equality agenda, and also many of you who know as much, if not more, about this issue that I'm able to tell you today. So apologies if this is all very familiar to you, but I'm imagining that there are some people here for whom this initiative is fairly new, and so I want to make sure that I can get a chance to talk to you about the depth and breadth of the initiative, and why we're absolutely thrilled to be partnering with the academies to deliver the program in Australia. So I think I can see down there. Let's have a look. History of the Charter and recent changes. Okay, that's what we'll do next. First of all, about ECU. Just it may be useful for you to know this, but Equality Challenge Unit is the UK higher education sector's equality and diversity policy and research agency. That I always want to say that because it kind of frames who we are and what we do. It doesn't lend itself well to a useful acronym. We've tried. But we essentially work to support universities and research institutes and the research sector more broadly to advance equality and diversity across 9, what in the UK we call protected characteristics, which is really the legal term for identities, gender of which is one, but obviously there are others: race, disability, age, sexual orientation, religion and belief, transgender status, pregnancy and maternity, and marriage and civil partnership. There is a missing well, there are lots of missing identities there, but probably the key one, which some of the you may have spotted, is socioeconomic disadvantage or class. If that was within our remit, it'd be the end of capitalism, probably. But it isn't in our remit, so it isn't the end of capitalism. But I may get a chance to talk about this more later. I don't think you can really understand the particularities of exclusion or disadvantage unless you configure your thinking by considering the totality of everyone's identities. None of us are siloed. None of us are just men or women, or just old or young, or just white or black or Asian or otherwise. And more and more my organisation, ECU, seeks to try and understand the nature of exclusion, underrepresentation and disadvantage through what's often called intersectionality. But I think we may get a chance to talk about that more later. We are We are a not-for-profit. We're a UK higher education sector agency, so we're a charity by constitution. We were established in 2001. We've grown significantly. I joined in 2010. It's my first job not as a lawyer, so I sometimes say that I'm a recovering lawyer. But one of the consequences of running the Athena Swan Charter is to coin Elizabeth's really useful phrase of disruption, or word of disruption. We are a disruptive influence, and when you are a disruptive influence, people get upset. And now ECU, we are tiny. We have no power. We have no regulatory or enforcement power. We are not a statutory agency. I came from a statutory agency, so I know what it's like to have some power. We have no power. We're tiny. Anyone can squash us if they wanted to. And that's a challenge for us because it means that we have to navigate our relationships. The extent to which we have power and influence is entirely soft. That means that we can walk 2 or 3 steps ahead of the sector. We can't walk 6 steps ahead of the sector. We certainly are not a campaigning agency. We won't embarrass anyone. We won't call for anyone's resignation. We won't shame anyone. We won't operate league tables, even if such a thing were possible. We won't say who's terrible. We will use our influence in whatever way we can. I have a team of analysts and researchers to try and push the agenda. Having said that, we do have some power. So I have had personal conversations with vice-chancellors who've demanded to see me. You can't say no to a vice-chancellor who demands to see you. Then they've threatened to sue us because we hadn't given them a silver award or a gold award. And I don't say this to the vice-chancellor, but I really want them to sue us because I miss going to court. But also, I know and they know that it would be politically stupid for a university with a turnover of £250 million or more to be suing an agency of 35 people with no power whatsoever because we haven't given them an award for gender equality. It would backfire considerably. So I'm not stupid, but I'm also acutely aware that we have there is a narrative here that we have to engage with. I'm also a big fan of universities and the core functions of higher education: teaching, learning, research, and knowledge exchange. One of the many things I love about the sector is it loves ideas, and there's an opportunity there for all of us to work with people, whatever their position. So I paint you that very kind of thin picture to give you a perspective of the small p political environment within which we're operating. We take an evidence-based approach to everything that we do. So all of our work is built on our research, our own research, our qualitative and quantitative research, and the Athena Swan Charter was built on that basis and was iterated accordingly. That's all the things we do. Anything which is short of a regulatory role, we can't make anyone do anything, but we use all of the levers available from research, guidance, action learning sets, conferences, seminars. We run regional networks. We have a helpline. We do training, a lot of unconscious bias training. We have different training packages. By the way, just on unconscious bias training, just to pick up the point that the panel made, one of the things that I always find it useful when we do this training, and my team delivers most of the training, but I do it sometimes with senior management teams, particularly where they're interested in thought leadership as well as training, is that the unconscious bias applies to everybody. There's a fascinating study done in the US, the name of which escapes me for the minute, where I think 250 or something fictitious applications for laboratory managers in universities were sent out, identical applications, save that roughly half of them had a male name and roughly half had a female name. And as will not be of no surprise to you, a disproportionately large number of the so-called male applications were put down to be shortlisted, even though they were all identical compared to the female ones. And in fact, when the selectors were asked what do you think would be an appropriate starting salary for the successful candidate, for the male applications, it was sometimes something like 1.5 times higher than it was for the female applicants. So evident bias there. The interesting thing is that the bias was as evident in the female selectors as it was in the male selectors. And I'm not saying that because I'm interested in casting aspersions or blame. I'm just saying we all grow up in the same environment. We all grow up in the same patriarchal and sexist environment, so why would you expect anything else? It's also useful to talk about that because it gets us away from who's the most sexist and who's the least sexist person around. I mean, these are real issues, and there are people out there. But actually, if we want to move institutions and indeed sectors, which is what we at ECU want to do, we want to get away from defensiveness. And this is a way in which we can articulate that this is a strategic sector-wide problem for everybody. And that's why we all need to address this. So, by the way, I have a capacity and a tendency to extemporize and also to go off-piste. So I can't promise you what I'm going to talk about this morning, but I do have my team always give me a PowerPoint to try and keep me on track. Oops. Have I skipped something? No, I haven't. So, Athena Swan is a recognition scheme of excellence in women's employment in STEM. That's actually technically correct. I tend to describe it instead as a long-term systemic change program to address historic, chronic issues of underrepresentation which have been resistant thus far to change. That's essentially what it is. And our charters, ECU's charters, are the bits of our program of work which try and address things in a long-term systemic way. It started in 2005, as I mentioned earlier, with a number of significant women leaders working with us and some other people, with 10 members. 10 universities participated. I'll tell you this now, by around early 2011, we had about 35 university members. Then the earthquake happened. Now, the earthquake, which I will, one day when I retire, write a book about this, happened on July the 29th, 2011, when I came into ECU. It's a period, as many of you will know, in the UK when most universities shut down. It's the holidays, summer holidays. Not a lot happens. Most of my team go on holiday then. I stay in, and I think this is the time I'm going to read that research report that I have to read, but I've never had time to read. All that sort of thing. The phones were ringing off the hook. Why? Because Dame Sally Davies, who is the UK government's chief medical officer and incidentally is responsible for the distribution of about £130 million of medical research funding, took a decision that for the next round of biomedical research funding awards, which is this year actually imminent, she was not going to give any money to any department unless they had an Athena Swan Silver Award. I had no idea. No idea. With hindsight, it was fantastic that I had no idea. Because one of the consequences is that I had to turn up at a university's UK meeting, the sister organisation to Universities Australia, to face some very upset vice-chancellors, along with the chair of my board, who is herself a vice-chancellor, who thought that we were breaching our limited role in trying to turn ourselves into a regulator, quasi-regulator, by attaching conditions to funding grants. I genuinely, honestly had nothing to do with it. Dame Sally later told me that she didn't tell me because she knew that would be what would happen to me. She's a very, very, very wise woman. We also managed to get some extra money out of Dame Sally as a result of it, so it's all, from our point of view, a good thing. But a consequence of that is that there was an explosion in participation in Athena Swan, not just from universities with biomedical research departments. Because what happened is many of them were already members, but those who weren't soon joined. But then that developed a critical mass. At some point, and I don't know what the exact number is, it became the case that no institution with a STEM department, because Athena Swan then was just for STEM, wanted to be seen as not participating in Athena Swan. And so now we have saturation point for that reason. So we celebrated our 10th anniversary last year. There's a horrible photo of me with Julia Higgins, Sir Paul Nurse, who are Dame Julia Higgins and Sir Paul Nurse, two of our patrons and other people as well. And we had a big cake, and that was very nice. And now I'm going to tell you a bit more about the detail of the Charter. So it's a progressive instrument. Now, I've been involved in seeking to advance equality and diversity really all of my life. As a young person and as a student, as an activist and a campaigner, as a young lawyer, I used to be the legal observer on demonstrations, which was hilariously good fun. And then as a practicing lawyer and now as running ECU, this has been my life's work. And I have come across a significant number of what are called charters or instruments or other things, many of which are very good. But I don't think I've come across one which, in my view, is as good as Athena Swan. And I say this, I haven't invented it, so it's not my instrument that I can sort of brag about. It was already built when I joined ECU, although it's iterated since then. And the reason for that is it requires continuous improvement, and it's challenging. It's challenging for institutions and departments. A gold award holder now, or sorry, there are not many of those, I'll come back to gold. A bronze award holder now, when they come up to renew their bronze in 4 years' time, has to show progress. If they're in the same place, they don't get a bronze, even though you might say, well, actually, we got it 4 years ago, so why can't we get it now? Because there hasn't been progress. It's a progressive instrument. It requires change for success. Bronze essentially this is a very brief summary of the process, requires detailed self-analysis, which allows the institutional department to identify issues and challenges and then plan activities to change. Now, what's required for one institution or indeed one department won't be the same for another, and that's why it's not you do these 10 things and you get your award. So subject disciplines have different issues, different institutions have different issues, and they have to understand what their own issues are, where the pinch points are. Is it undergraduates not coming through? Is it returners for staff who've taken career breaks not coming back? What are the issues? Is it that there are no nursery facilities? I'm not saying that's childcare issues are the only ones. It's certainly not, but they're one of the issues. What are the issues? And that's what has to happen at bronze. At silver, as well as that, there needs to be demonstrable evidence of impact and achievement, often with case studies. And with gold, there has to be significant record of activity and impact, and basically the department has to be a beacon, has to be a lead-changing department. At the moment, there are 8 gold award holders out of about 500 and something award holders. It's very, very hard to get a gold. Very hard, as it should be. There are no gold institutional awards because we only introduced that last year. We didn't think institutions were ready for institution-wide gold status until last year when we introduced the criteria. And there are a number of institutions in the UK who are working towards it, but there are no award holders yet. There you are, 568 award holders, 84 university awards, 75 at bronze, 9 at silver. This is after 11 years. 13 research institution awards, 10 at bronze, 3 at silver, 471 departmental awards, 315 bronze, 149 silver, and 7 gold. The success rate, 70%. It changes, actually. If you don't succeed, that doesn't mean that's it. It means you get a lot of feedback, you get an analysis of your application, and then you get to try again. Overall, so 70% is the success rate, but it doesn't mean that the applicant has succeeded first time. But it's still quite a high, if you like, not success rate, because it's a thoroughgoing process. It's an instrument that requires a lot of work. One participant said to me that applying for a silver award was a bit like an MPhil dissertation. It requires an enormous level of activity and intervention, as it should, because these are not easy issues to change. If they were, we would have done it. You know, in the UK, we've had over 50 years of anti-discrimination legislation. Our first Equal Pay Act was in 1970. I'm sure there are similar arrangements in Australia. But so why is it still the case? Why are all the issues that the colleagues on the panel and that we've been talking about still the case? Why is there a gender pay gap? Why is there an underrepresentation in the professoriate? 21%, 22% of professors across all disciplines are women. What's going on? It's sclerotic. So you need you need a systematic, long-term approach. I'm not going to pretend that Athena Swan is the only answer. I think there are many other initiatives. But what we were determined to do at ECU is to create and iterate, because it continues to build, a process which would meet the challenge of something so tricky as the chronic underrepresentation of women. It's a recognition scheme. Last year in the UK, it was extended to cover all disciplines, subject disciplines. So we now take applications from departments and whose function is arts, humanities, social science, business and law. That's not the approach yet in Australia. So in Australia, it's still focused on STEM. We also now in the UK include professional and support service staff as well, and that has been really important because they're often easily forgotten in university work, sadly. So institutional applications now have to think about the issue, gender issues relating to them. And actually, it's a gender issue. So there are some areas of underrepresentation of men, nursing, for example, the development of the work puts a focus on that as well. Right, don't need to talk about that. I've talked about that. Oh, intersectionality. So, I mentioned this already. I don't think that you can understand the particularities of underrepresentation or exclusion unless you try and configure as best as you can ideally everyone's identities, whatever they are. The more you include, the more complex it gets. But I'll give you an example of why it matters. It's actually outside of the gender arena. One of the things that my organisation does is we map and track the demographics of the UK higher education sector. So we every year we collect data on who works at universities and who studies at universities, and we deep dive it in increasingly sophisticated ways, the data. So we look at it by subject discipline, career progression, including now postgraduate graduate employability, by protected characteristic, by gender, race, disability, age, etc. As best as we can, because there's not comprehensive data for some of those identities. One of the demographics that don't do particularly well at student level are British Bangladeshi heritage men. So British Bangladeshi heritage men are less likely to go to university than other demographics. If they do, they're less likely to remain. And if they do complete their course, they're less likely to get a good degree, which is a first or a 2-1. But if you compare them with international Bangladeshi heritage men, those who come to study in the UK from the nascent middle class in Dhaka, they do much better in all of those metrics. And the best way we can understand that is it's nothing to do with ethnicity, because they're both the same heritage. The difference is class or socioeconomic background, because most migrants, British Bangladeshi men, tend to be 3rd or 4th generation applicants, but their grandparents or great-grandparents who came over to Britain mostly came from 3 villages in the Sylhet region. They were peasant farmers. So they had little or no history or cultural capital of higher education, whereas those who are coming from the middle class in Dhaka do. So this is not about good or bad. This is about understanding why there is exclusion and underrepresentation. And that plays out with, however you configure your understanding of underrepresentation or disadvantage. The same is true for if you look at which women succeed well and which do badly. When you fold in other identities, it makes a difference. And Swan is beginning to do that, particularly in the UK with race. That's Tom Welton. Tom's department, he's a force of nature. His department of chemistry, I think it is in Imperial, got a gold, and he was the main champion for that. That's a quote from him about why he thinks it's important to have professional support service staff, I think. That's what he says. So, benefits and impact of Athena Swan. Complete an application, win an award, repeat. That's what you do. Do an application, get your award, and then start again, because you've got it for 4 years. You've got to start the work to do it again. Not that straightforward, of course. It's an individualized approach. It's not tick boxing. I hope I've sort of illustrated how that is. What one department or one institution will do will be quite different. It won't. You can't just Xerox, a standard bronze application and put your vice chancellor's name on the front of it and send it in and get an award. It won't work. In detail, you collect data, qualitative and quantitative. You identify and analyze what that means. You develop a 4-year action plan. It used to be 3 years, but we've given everybody an extra year now. And you show progress. This really remains one of the most contentious issues, the fact that it's a progressive instrument. But I and my board have determined that we won't change that, because that's part of its potency. We want to transform the demographics of the sector. That's our long-term ambition. And if we could, no point in doing something unless we're going to do that. I don't know who said that, actually. Anyway, all of it is true. Anyway, I don't need to spend time on that. Why does it work? It was set up by and for the academic and research community. It's a program that's configured through the needs and demands of those who are engaged in teaching, learning, research, and knowledge exchange. It's led by and championed by senior academics. So there is buy-in from the top. We have some very, very, very significant leaders, vice-chancellors, professors, emeritus professors and others who ensure that their institutions are on board. Dame Sally Davis and others like her have made a huge difference. It requires thorough self-assessment. It promotes staff consultation, and again, valid for only 4 years. What it's not about that. It's not about tokenism. It's not about suggesting anything. It's not operating a deficit model. It doesn't say what's the problem with women. And it has quite a narrow definition of success. Now, we don't apologize. That's not the only issues around gender equality, but it was consciously constructed in a narrow way because we wanted to make sure that we could keep the focus on the original issue, which is underrepresentation. So obviously there are other issues like harassment and cultural issues which should and will get picked up, but we can't measure them through the SWAN process, except that's actually not entirely true. If the culture and the analysis suggests that there's a lot of that going on, then no one will get an award. But what we don't do is measure it in the way that we do progress, in sort of academic progress. There are commitments there, targeted approach, good practice, and honesty. We ask for honesty. Every sector. Now, this is not a problem just for universities and research institutes, as we know. And for the reasons I mentioned, the example I gave around unconscious bias, this is a problem that affects all of us. So we ask for honesty. We're not interested in blaming. We're interested in changing. Because that's, our ultimate, that's our complete ambition. That's what someone said.
Such a cheat.
Yeah. That's what I think are the benefits. There's lots more I could say about that, but those are some of the... as an aside, some of the colleagues were talking about why do this. Part of my job as chief executive is to go and talk to vice chancellors and other leaders about our work and what their issues are and what matters to them and how we can help them. And in my mind, I get three kinds, I don't tell them this, but in my mind I get three answers to my question of why is equality and diversity important to you? No one says it's not important to me. And so you have to kind of get beyond, being in favour of equality and diversity is a bit like being against cruelty to animals. No one's in favour of cruelty to animals. But what that means for people varies considerably. So I get three kinds of answers. The first answer is, really, it's about regulatory requirements. No one wants to break the law or create a reputational risk. So for some leaders, that's it, really. You're not going to get very far with them because their ambition is fairly minimal. There's a much larger group of leaders who, if you like, recognize what's often called the business case. And some of that has been spoken about already today. So, in a nutshell, homogeneity is the enemy of success. Diversity is essential for success. That's really the business case, and there's lots of evidence, mainly in the commercial sector, about how that works, but more and more in public sectors and education. And then the third type, and these do overlap, they're not actually completely distinct. The third group, for them, it's their own personal mission. Equality and diversity. They can't contemplate being a leader and not thinking about these issues. And you can, not surprisingly, get much more, go much further with that third group. You can do a lot with each group, actually, but you can, the door's much more open with the third group. And this is one way in which we can try, and it doesn't really reach the third group so much, or a little bit it does, because you can always talk about reputational risk if they don't participate. But this is one of the ways that we have of demonstrating specific benefits. We did an evaluation report. We did an internal evaluation of SWAN in 2011, but then in 2014 we commissioned Loughborough University to do an evaluation because we wanted to examine the efficacy of it. All of this is on our website, by the way, and I'm very happy for these slides to be circulated to anyone who wants them. What Loughborough found was very gratifying in terms of the efficacy of the charter. It demonstrated sustainable change. Actually, these are the more compelling things. For women, they reported improved visibility and increased self-confidence and enhanced leadership skills. All staff talked about positive differences in career satisfaction and development opportunities, and the admin and technical staff report greater sense of belonging. Well, that was fabulous. I love that. Can I tell you, Imperial College London, which has a Gold Award, when they got their Gold Award, I remember going to South West London, which is where Imperial is, and they have these little vans, like many universities, which scuttle around, delivering things between different parts of the campus. And they changed them. They emblazoned across the side of the van Athena Swan Gold Award holder. And they put it up front and central on their website. So I remember talking to Tom and others about this. That's brilliant, but why is this so important? I mean, I know it's important to you, but why Imperial, as I'm sure you all know, is a world-leading institution. Why are you doing this? And they said, well, we reckon it'll help us attract better staff. We will continue to attract the best. And there's some anecdotal evidence that this is now the case, that universities who are successful in SWAN become destinations of choice for all staff. So if you want a business case reason for doing it, that's one of them. Terry Threadgold gives another argument. We did some research, 2014. It's not related to Athena Swan. We wanted to understand the motivations of leaders who would get engaged in equality and diversity. This is research. It's called Articulating the Rationale for Diversity. That's also on our website. And that's a representation of the core rationale that leaders use for why this is important. Not just SWAN, but the whole range and spectrum of activities that are around for advancing equality and diversity, for society as a whole, for students and for staff. Tom also says he reckons that getting a gold has increased their research income. Wow, it's amazing. So, I talked about NIH funding and the Athena Swan Silver, £110 million for biomedical research, plus an extra 20 million to other aspects of medical research. Others have joined the club, so to speak. Welsh National Institute for Social Care and Health Research also requires it. Research Councils UK has a statement of expectations regarding equality and diversity. They don't quite require success in SWAN in the same way as is required for NIHR funding, but it's a strong steer. Royal Society of Edinburgh report, Tapping All Talents, talks about the importance of equality now as being essential to research. And Scottish Funding Council, you probably know that in the UK, higher education is a devolved function. So each country is responsible for its own arrangements. The Scottish Funding Council requires universities to participate in Athena Swan, not to succeed in any particular way, but to participate. Nuffield Council on Bioethics also talks about this as well. So very quickly, ECU is involved in a 10-nation European Commission funded initiative to address challenges facing European research institutions with 12 partners. Athena Swan has been found to be the only scheme which is both successful and transferable, so we may see it being iterated and developed there, or at least in some countries there. We now operate this charter in Ireland. That's me and the minister and some other people. It's more about Ireland. I'm going to skip through these because we're running out of time. Of course, you all know about Australia. I don't need to repeat that. It's been talked about. We're thrilled about that. Absolutely thrilled about that. And what next? Gold, hopefully we'll get a gold institutional award in the next year or two. That's what's required. That's what will be required before anyone gets it. There is competition amongst the gold departmental universities to be the first. We also produced a race equality charter, which I can talk about over a cocktail later if you want. That's the launch of that, which we had in January. And that's more about it. And thank you very much.
I would like to know, who were some of the VCs that were being very naughty and we got towards the legal threat?
I couldn't possibly comment.
Oh, yes, you could. You're amongst friends.
I am amongst friends. I mean, I honestly can't tell you the names, but I tell you, one of them came to me and sort of exasperated and said, "You don't understand how demoralizing it is that all my team worked so hard and they didn't get the award." And I'm not sure what, I mean, do you give out degrees on the basis that the student is going to be demoralized if they don't get, I mean, and then another one said, "You do know that we're consulting lawyers." They said, "We're consulting lawyers." And this is a huge Russell Group university. You know, they could squash us by kind of looking at us. We are consulting lawyers. And they thought that I'd be scared, but I'm so desperate to get back into court. And I just think it'd be foolish. I mean, you know, it's foolish. So I don't, you know, I mean, then this makes me sound as if I'm sort of arrogant. Probably I am a bit arrogant. But you know, the bottom line is, the serious point is, if we don't keep the confidence of institutions in the sector, we won't be able to survive. Swan won't succeed. So the kind of serious point here is that we have to tread a narrow path whereby we can continue to push the agenda at the same time as keeping the confidence, which means that the sector knows that we're going to help them. We're not out to try and be horrible to them. So that's partly why I won't give you any names, because that's not what our game is. Yeah. But it is it's a tricky line to follow.
Yeah, I understand. Question down back.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, speak up.
Can you hear me now?
Please identify yourself.
Yeah. So, hi David. I'm Kobe Rudd from ECU.
Why haven't I met you?
I know. I didn't get invited for cake. Edith Cowan University. And Edith Cowan University is the only university in Australia named after a woman.
Right.
Australia's first female parliamentarian. So, great talk. Thank you so much. Just a quick question that hasn't really been covered to thus far in the symposium. Whilst gender equality is not a woman's problem, one of the things that seems to be evident is that women tend to only apply for positions or promotion if they meet 10 out of 10 of the criteria. In fact, a very senior scientist said to me recently she met 9.5 out of 10 criteria and didn't apply for the position and was headhunted later and actually was appointed chief scientist in Western Australia. Yet men may throw in an application if they meet 4 or so, thinking, let's just see what happens. Yeah. So there is something around helping women with their internal dialogue. And I was just wondering if in the UK there's any specific progress in the realm of, imposter syndrome, changing internal dialogue. Thank you.
Excellent question, thank you. Often these issues are characterised with being not fixing the fixing the system, not the woman. And I understand why it's characterized in that way, simply because too often women are blamed for their own underrepresentation, and that is utterly wrong. But I think there isn't really quite a dichotomy in that way as it's often put, because there are, not surprisingly, there are, it's quite hard to talk about this simply, but we all grew up in an environment which had presuppositions about all of us, so it's not surprising that we've all internalized them. That's true of men as well as women. And so initiatives to help people uninternalize those messages is important. So certainly in the UK there are a range of initiatives. In fact, the Athena Swan Charter, some of the good practice that comes out of departmental and institutional submissions include things like mentoring schemes, champions, and what we call positive action programs. And then there's a sister agency to us, the Leadership Foundation for Higher Education, which runs something called the Aurora program, which takes aspiring women leaders. It's a kind of leadership development program. We actually developed it with them. So I think all of those things are helpful. I don't think of those as fixing the woman. I think of those as addressing the kind of misinformation, misunderstanding which we've all internalized. And I think it's important, as well as changing structures. Yeah.
In the middle?
Yep. Hello, I'm Kerry Wilson from the University of Queensland. I was pleased to see the evaluation that you've done, and of course there are lots of benefits being brought forward. I'm interested in potential perversities that you're able to see from the data, and whether or not you've explored any of those. One example being the shuffling of women around the institutions rather than institutions growing their women from within. Have you explored those sorts of...
You mean institutions trying to just...
Headhunt,
headhunt other women so that they've got other women in. I haven't heard that. So I should say at the outset that obviously I'm here talking to you and I'm the chief executive, but Sarah and her team run the process, so they may have more detail of this. I have not been made aware of that being an issue. It has been an issue in Norway, where they have requirements for women on boards of companies. There has been something like that, where some women hold something like 180 directorships because everybody's going to them so that they can tick that box. We haven't seen something like that similarly. I would say that transforming the demographics of institutions is a generational thing, because people don't retire as professors every day. Once you're in, or even as lecturers or senior lecturers, once you're in that post, it's going to take time for the change, for the numbers to change dramatically. But there is an upward trend. So every year when we map the demographics, it's an improvement on previous years. But the particular thing that you've raised, I'm not aware of it anyway.
Another question down to my left.
Yes, so I'm Justine Smith from Flinders University. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
Just a practical question. So a silver award is very challenging to achieve.
Yes.
How do you deal with a department that loses its silver? Do they drop to bronze? Do they lose the award completely? When they reapply, do they apply at the silver level? Do you give them special assistance to get back? Because it's so, the fact that they achieved that was so, was a lot of work for them. How do you deal with that situation?
Right. Thank you. So the Athena Swan Charter is not a zero-sum game. So there's no reason why everyone should not succeed. Conceptually, it might be difficult for everyone to be a gold holder because that's beacon status, and philosophically, can everybody be a beacon? I don't know. We haven't reached that problem yet. But it's not a league table. It's not like this one's good and that one's terrible. There's no reason why everyone shouldn't have met the criteria, at least for silver. So I'll tell you precisely what happens. Let's say a silver departmental award holder has their award and they're approaching the 4th year of that award. So they have hopefully been preparing and doing the work, because you can't just stop once you've got the award. It's their choice as to whether they come back and in fact, they don't have to apply for renewal. They don't have to. No one makes them. If they don't, they just no longer have a silver award. But assuming that they do, I don't know of anyone who hasn't reapplied. Assuming they do, they could apply for a bronze. Why would they? Because it looks like they've gone backwards. They could apply for a renewal of their silver, or they could apply for gold. Let's assume it's a renewal of the silver or a gold. which is the most common. The panel then has three choices. Give them what they've applied for. Rarely there's the option of requiring further information, but we're moving away from that. We used to do that a lot more, but we try and make hard and fast decisions on the basis of what we have. Or the other option is they don't get the award. If they don't get the award, we give them a year's grace. So they get another year to reapply where they don't lose their silver. And the other thing I should say is we try and provide them with a lot of support. So a lot of my team do training, and we give them detailed feedback. They meet with colleagues. We do workshops on what it means to be successful and what they need to do. We do workshops on data analysis. We provide support in every way we can. They then have another year. If after that year they still don't meet the threshold, then the options available to the panel are to again refuse them, in which case they have no award, or they could, if they decide they meet the lower award, the bronze, give them that. So those are the options.
Katrina?
I hate to do this, I've got two questions. The more you talk about this, the more political it sounds. And the finer the line you're walking. I think I'm asking this in the interest of the goodness me, aren't we grateful to the Academy of Science and ATSI who have taken on this project. You obviously have to walk a very fine line quite often. Can you furnish some advice to them about how they do that? But the other thing I want to ask you is, from a Universities Australia perspective, I can't understand how you can change half a university culture and not the rest. How can it just be STEM and not humanities and social sciences? We're assuming it'll expand out, but surely there's a bleed factor in here. If you're doing STEM, surely that has some effect on the rest of the university. How did that work for you?
So in terms of advice, I mean, the academies are obviously different creatures from us. They, in some respects, my guess, I'm not really one to speak for them, but my guess is that they've got, you know, because they're learned societies, they have a broader bottom on which they can support any pressure. That's not a peculiar structures. I'm thinking of pillars and I don't know. I can clearly not articulate. Yes, they've got strength. They've got strength, so they are in a different place. I know that, you know, for their ongoing discussions, and perhaps the academies will want to say more about this in terms of kind of the future plan for the hosting of Athena Swan, and it might not be that the academy is the best place to do that, that there may need to be another institution. So I don't know that it would be presumptuous of me to think about how the academies could deal with the politics. I suspect they're very adept at thinking about those issues. But your second question, when we took 11 years before we felt that the charter was sufficiently embedded that we could extend it to the other disciplines. I mean, I hope that Australia will choose to do so in due course. But you know, this at the moment, you're all in a period where you're learning fast and looking to build on progress in STEM disciplines. And the reason why STEM is because that's where the underrepresentation is most chronic. It's most chronic. And yes, you're absolutely right. If an institution's STEM departments do it and an institution gets an award, there is no doubt that there's going to be beneficial effects for the other departments as well.
Well, one final question, and then we'll wrap for lunch. So I'm sorry.
Hi, Rosalind Princely, Office of the Chief Scientist. I was just interested in the evaluation, and there was a comment about the main motivation for participation being to do the right thing, yet you had an influx of participants when there was a kind of more of a reward at the other end, and I was just wondering about the truth of the responses.
You know, who's to say? The way I characterise those three different types of leader, it was too crude. Invariably, you know, you will have a leader who wants to do something because they want to maintain their position as a world-leading institution, able to attract staff and students from wherever. But they won't have no ethical values. They'll also have a, you know, it's not. I was being overly simplistic there. You know, it's probably a question of it's the right thing to do, and we've had a push, sort of thing. So, you know, those are probably closer. That's a more accurate description. I mean, it has to be said, and I'm not going to name names, I'm sorry, there are completely uninterested in vice-chancellors. There are vice-chancellors who wish Dame Sally hadn't done that and wish that we didn't exist. They don't, they don't have a malign intent towards us, or at least I don't think they do. They just think that we're another burden on them. But they're not, probably the truth of the matter is that they are a significant minority.
Well, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.